Black Mountainside is a 2014 Canadian horror thriller written and directed by Nicholas Zastaskowski, starring Michael Dixon, Shane Twerden, Carl Toftlet, Mark Anthony Williams, Andrew Moxham, Timothy Lyle, and Steve Bradley. Let's take a quick look.
A week ago, we began unearthing a large object that we think is the roof of a structure that goes down really far. If this is the real deal, then we're looking at one of the biggest finds in the past century.
The crew will be remembered for the greatest archaeological find possibly ever.
Yeah, I like the sound of that.
There it is, gentlemen.
Still feel like shit, eh?
Yeah.
You've been feeling progressively worse throughout the week?
Yeah.
Someone was sneaking around the outpost last night.
I don't know, maybe it was an animal.
For Christ's sake, that was no animal.
When was the last time you slept?
I'm not sure.
You're hallucinating.
He's here, now, listening, watching. He's watching me. Jensen, I can't move without him watching me. I can't move.
Calm down.
Welcome back to the Cult of Films. I'm John, the host, and today we have a very special episode with a very special guest for the very first time, Mr. Justin Thibault. Thank you so much for joining us, sir.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been meaning to hook up with you for a while. I always saw that you had some really good movie takes, so I'm like, you know what? I'm going to bug this guy about some films, and holy shit, am I happy I did, because you introduced me to this film that we're talking about today, Black Mountainside, which was completely not on my radar whatsoever, which is so unfortunate, and we're going to get into all that, why that's so unfortunate. But how did you find this film, Justin?
I can't recall exactly how, but I love Lovecraftian themed horror. I like when the horror that I consume is very much existential or it is super unknown. And so I constantly will like Google like Lovecraftian themed horror. I watch a YouTuber called Deus Deacon, and he does a lot of horror reviews, and I absolutely love his stuff. So it wasn't him who did it, but I think at some point I just found a review of something called Black Mountainside, and I was like, oh, this looks cool. I'm going to go ahead and watch it. So I did.
And, I mean, we all won for that. My life got better because of that decision. Before we get too far into it, as I do on this show, I am actually partaking. This is a special show, a special episode with a special guest and a special movie. So I had to get a special brew to accompany me with this. So I live up in the Pacific Northwest. Manny's is kind of an institution from Georgetown Brewing. It's a pale ale. You go in everywhere in the Pacific Northwest and you get a Manny's on tap, or from what I've been told. But because the world kind of shut down in a very Lovecraftian way, they decided to can the Manny's pale ale for the first time ever. So these are really hard to find. I had to like stow one away before, I got off work. I had to hide it because literally we put out a pallet of it and it was gone by like noon. So this is the first time ever that I'm trying a Manny's pale ale. So I'm going to drink to your health, Justin. L'chaim.
Thank you very much.
Okay. When I asked you initially why you wanted to review this particular film, you said, quote, "It doesn't get enough respect from horror fans." So why do you think that is?
And no offense to the type of people I'm talking about, but it's kind of from what I call popcorn horror fans. So they're individuals who prefer that movie theater experience where there's a bunch of people around them and it's more of a spectacle. And I think it doesn't get enough respect because it is more of a slow burn. It's more of a character piece, kind of, because the characters really sell that movie, at least for me. And it doesn't have the hallmarks of typical horror films. Like, it's not super gory. They don't show a lot of like conventionally horrific scenes.
Right.
And I think that's one of the main reasons that it doesn't get the kind of respect it deserves. It's not the traditional horror film that these people who are just going to movie theaters to see them are watching.
First off, I want to say that we're going to keep this as non-spoilery as possible. Usually on the Cult of Films, I talk about films that have been out for years, or, you know, that people had opportune time to go see these films. However, this is such an underknown and undervalued film. I think it's important that people go run out and see this, which you can on Prime or on Tubi. So it is streaming in a couple places, so it is very accessible to go see. So I'm going to try to keep this as spoiler free as possible, for just so like fans could go out and check this movie out. So this is as I like to do, is talk about the filmmaker himself, this director. This is his first feature. That's insane how well that this is made. He has a movie coming out this year called Archons, or Hammer of the Gods. It's running around the festivals right now, if the festivals are even happening or on pause right now. But I know there's like Jon Dunning has already reviewed it, so it's out there in the ether. It's in the can at least. So I can't wait to see that. But you could tell that this, you know, to what kind of like gall does a person tackle this subject matter and this location on their first outing is crazy. Because you could tell this, although everyone looked like they were having a blast filming it, it had to have been a pain in the ass.
Yeah, I mean, the cold, I'm sure, the cold alone had to have been tough for those actors. But you also have to think of like the logistics of it. Having that amount of equipment and stuff for in my opinion, the great shots that they got, it had to have been difficult to do.
If you don't mind, I always throw it on the guest's shoulders. What is, in a non-spoilery way, Justin, what is Black Mountainside about?
Black Mountainside, in my opinion at least, is about, and this is kind of the Lovecraftian theme. It's about the hubris of man in uncovering things they shouldn't.
Perfect. Yeah. There's a group of archaeologists, and they have the, you know, the doctor and the specific, you know, specialists for these particular, you know, jobs. And it's all about, you know, they're all kind of up here where it's like the most north you could get, inhospitable area in Canada, basically. And they're all just trying to, so it's exactly what you said, but on surface level, it's also this group of people have uncovered something, things ensue.
Yeah, I'm trying not to give things away, because I think the way things ensue are kind of what I like about this picture over other horror movies. Like, nice to me the pacing of the film, because one of the main things that I saw as a criticism of this film is that it's slow, that like nothing happens in it, and that's incredibly not true. There are several shots, and I don't know how much you noticed this, but I don't really want to give it away. But there are several shots that are recurring, that are slightly changed each time they're shown. And that type of thing is shown also with the character interactions. You know, we see a slow build of how the interactions between the characters evolve, and kind of the apotheosis of their character archetypes as the film goes on. And I really like that build up, because that type of suspense is what I'm looking for in a sort of existential film. Like
you said, this is not a terror film. This is more of a horror film. It's a slow burn, like almost like a David Lynch film. It has obvious comparisons to, you know, John Carpenter's The Thing. And I think it does. I think it is a slight love letter to it. There is a lot of parallels to it, but there's also like some of the supernatural aspects of like Jeremy Saulnier's Hold the Dark. There's a lot of that in there, and again, like it plays out like a David Lynch film, where David Lynch has horrifying movies, but it's just because of the buildup is done with such patience. It's like you have to walk around the corner really slow, and it might be something pops out, and it might not be something that pops out. That's kind of the slow burn, and you get rewarded so much in this movie for if you have an iota of patience.
And I want to touch on the comparison to The Thing, because obviously it's hard not to make comparisons there, not only because of the setting. You know, we're in a cold environment with researchers that uncover some stuff, things happen. But also, I mean, we even have a character with the last name Giles, right? That's a direct homage, I assume, to John Carpenter's Thing, and it's even the black character as well. But I think it's also not an unfair comparison, but I think the comparison is a little bit overstated, because, you know, The Thing is a lot more about body horror. They still have that kind of distrust aspect, but in The Thing, it's very much about, like, holy crap, we know that this is an alien threat, and we know that it could be any one of us. But in Black Mountainside, do we know what's going on? Is it that we don't trust each other, or is it literally that they're just in a remote place and it's getting to them, like a kind of a cabin fever style thing?
100%. And also what sets this apart is how realistic the way the characters react. I mean, something happens, you know, nothing's happening for a while. When I say nothing, I meant like a horror movie nothing, right? It's, you get to really kind of settle in, and they take time to actually flesh out, you know, the characters that you're watching on screen. Then when something really does happen, you're actually invested because you care about the characters, and the reaction of the characters. It's almost comical, but it's comical in a way where it's so realistic, because it's just like something happens and they all like kind of run into that cabin, like, oh shit, and, you know, someone's thrown up in the corner and then someone else is just like crying, and it's just like, oh yeah, it's very realistic, where it doesn't feel like we're watching a film. It looks like we're watching, you know, someone had like a GoPro and was just like documenting these things.
Yeah, and I think, and I'm not sure about this, but when I first watched this, I loved it so much that I did something I usually don't do, and I looked a little bit into the film, because I wouldn't call myself a film buff. I prefer serialized content, because whenever I get something, I just want more. Sure. So that's why I generally prefer it, but horror films, best films. So I looked into it a little, and I believe that opening sequence had a lot of improvisation in there. So I think it feels like they're real characters because of, like, the dialogue being so real. Like, it's not something where it seems like this kind of super overly dramatic rehearsed thing where they're saying things that, like, no one says, right? When they're declaring things like, oh, you are doing this, like, no one talks like that.
Right.
And, you know, it's the whole liking these characters hits another nail on the head of the difference between sophisticated viewers of horror and the popcorn viewers, because a lot of the horror movies, and I think this was the main thing in the 90s and the 2000s up to mid 2010s, is that a lot of the horror movies had characters that weren't likable, so that people, like, wouldn't feel bad for just having them killed off in gruesome ways.
Sure.
But that gets rid of the true horror about it, is like, this can happen to good people and this can happen to anyone, right? And, like, having characters that feel real and feel like people that we can relate to in some way, it makes it closer to home. Whereas, like, oh, this character is like the stereotypical jock D-bag who is just, like, saying the rudest things to everyone. He's going to get his, and I'm glad that he does. And cool, it's this big spectacle. But in Black Mountainside, it's like, it's not a spectacle. This is horrifying that it's happening to these people.
It's really tough to explain time travel or, you know, science and theology in films in general. In this film, you know, your air quotes, you know, low budget horror film has to do two of those three things about, you know, science and the maybe theology about it, but they keep it ambiguous. You know, we don't know what kind of phenomenon we're dealing with here. We'll just call it the MacGuffin. But they explain it in an educated and a very believable way. But also the characters themselves are so believable because they know, like, it's absurd. They understand the absurdity of the situation, and that's why they react so genuinely to it. They're like, in most horror films, they're just like, oh, this totem is cursed and now the family is going to, you know, and they're just smelling their own farts so hard. But, like, in this film, it's just like, no, you know, there's something going on and there's transformations happening or whatever, and like, what? Yeah, they're just like, what are you talking about? He's like, one of the characters literally says, I can't dumb it down anymore for you. Like, it's literally, he's like, I know, everyone's just so self-aware, and that's what sells it so much more over, other films.
Yeah, it's so weird when in a lot of modern horror films, like, you have this obviously supernatural stuff happen when they're painting the world as if it is a normal place, and then a bunch of crazy stuff happens. It's like, oh yeah, I shouldn't immediately seek like the most professional people about this. It's like, this, I have something here which is provably haunted or something. I'm not gonna go to like a scientist and be like, bruh, I have a way to make both of us super rich, right? Like, or at least going to someone to get actual help. You get a bunch of teenagers with haunted technology or something, is like, oh yeah, no, this makes sense. I can totally battle this myself. It doesn't. Yeah. And in Black Mountain, I was like, these characters are freaking out. They're like, we have no real idea what's going on. And I like the amount of kind of not distrust, but like secrecy they have amongst each other, because they all have different skills. Like, there's the person who is the professional on the, I can't remember what they call it, but the natives in that area of Canada. Right. Then they bring in another professor who's experienced on something else. We have the doctor, mechanic. We have I don't remember what Giles is even there for, but we have characters who have specific roles, and like, we can see from their perspective of, yeah, no, this doesn't make sense in that context of my experience, my expertise, and we see how that is true for all of the other characters. It's just like, these people are understanding that what is going on is messed up, and kind of bringing it back to what you were talking about on what type of MacGuffin is going on. It's really nice how we don't know what that truly is. Like, right. I mean, a lot of things like, paranormal activity, I'll use as an example. They're demons. Like, that's like what they said. They're ghosts and demons. Like, cool. We have no idea if this is a scientific thing, a religious thing, a biological thing, right. A bunch of that stuff, and that all of those things are talked about as potentials. And I really appreciate is like, the point of a lot of this cosmological horror is our puny human minds can't understand what actually is happening.
Right. And there's a good chance that it's just psychological because they're so isolated.
Yeah.
It could be nothing. It literally could be anything, everything, and nothing, which is so cool because it doesn't spell it out for you. It leaves it open to interpretation. The very ending shot, which I'm not going to give away, could be, that could be the real MacGuffin that happens, to a person. There's so many different layers to this film, which you don't expect for this type of film, it's just so cool. And then first off, we got to talk about how gorgeous this film is. It is so pretty to look at. It sets the tone right away, where you get these huge sweeping shots of just like gorgeous, like snow-covered forest, and the sound design is so rich. And it's so transportive. Like, you're just in there. The cabins are nice. Like, you could smell the wood just by them just like walking around and going in and out of these little huts and stuff. But it's so pretty, and it's lit so cool. Like, even at the night shots, they have those like little tripod lights, but that's all they need. Like, and that's probably just like the set tripods, but it works within the context of the film also.
Yeah, I thought that was quite interesting that they had essentially excuses to light up the night scenes. It's like, right. These people are in a place where it's dark the majority of the time. It makes sense that they're going to have these big floodlights. But yeah, like, it is an absolutely beautiful scene, and it highlights not only like the isolation because there's nothing anywhere, but also highlights how this this situation can happen in what seems to be a very pure place.
Right. And
talking on the sound design, I'm willing to bet that a decent number of people also don't like the fact that there's not like a score, really. Like, you're not going to get a bunch of music. You're getting ambiance. And I think what little like added stuff that they do are like rumblings and things that are like kind of slightly there in the back of your mind to kind of niggle at you as well.
Yes.
So it's really interesting that you're getting to feel like you're there, as opposed to a bunch of musical stings of the next jump scare heading around the corner.
And don't come for a jump scare at all, because I don't think there is one in this film.
I think there technically is one, But it's not. It doesn't come with a sting. Giles yells at one point.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Giles yells, and there's another yelling scene. But the Giles yelling. This is not a spoiler, but he's cutting some wood, and that comes right after a really silent scene.
Right.
So that is like the closest to a jump scare.
Yeah.
And even then, it's like, sure.
That was just fun, right? Because it wasn't even a payoff of the other scene. It was just like
it was completely disconnected.
Yeah, because it's just looking at someone looking out the window, and then you're just expecting something to happen. Then you're like, cutting wood. Yeah. It was played really well. Huge props to Cameron Tremblay, who was the DP on this. His shot composition. We talked about just the landscapes themselves, but just the conversations and like you alluded to at the beginning of this, that first scene when they're all sitting at the poker table, for no reason at all, we're spinning around the poker table, so you get to pick up on everyone's little inputs and stuff, because no one really is the star. I guess you could, like two of them, like the main leader guy, I think his name is Jensen, and then the doctor that comes in on the helicopter. Those two, I guess you could say are like the main stars, but everyone has their time to shine. Everyone's important, and this thing is happening to everyone. But those specific scenes are really cool as far as just the shot composition goes. And I want to be really vague on this, but there's a scene where one of the characters is walking around at night with a rifle. And I think you kind of pointed this out. The color is a little different. The color filter is a little different. And it's such a long take. It's a one take shot, and this person's going in and out of places, and it's almost shot. It's like a over the shoulder, but it reminds me of like a video game. Like an Alan Wake or like one of those like survival horror games. And the same thing happens when another character that's like injured is like grabbing like dynamite and stuff. These like long like takes of shots of their backs and just like kind of walking around. I'm like, wow, I'm like in Skyrim right now.
Yeah, it really does immerse you into what's happening on screen, and because what's happening on screen is dire, it sucks in your stress.
Yeah. Oh man, let's talk about the effects, because practical and otherwise, I think it was done in a way to hide the budget constraints perfectly. I have a lot of friends that are independent filmmakers, and if you don't have the budget to show the thing, then you show the thing in a smart way. And I think across the board, there wasn't one time where I was just like, ooh, that didn't hold up. Or I see, that cost $5 or whatever.
Yeah.
They did everything, creature design, everything in a way where you saw what you need to see, and it still was that affecting and impactful.
Yeah, and I think they were really smart. Like, I think the first weird thing happening starts at least halfway through. I'm not going to say exactly when, but at least halfway through. And even then, we don't get more information about the thing that we're talking about until even later. And I think the way that they present initially, I don't actually think anything is there initially.
Right.
Because we're supposed to be with these characters. And I will say one of the other things that I'm sure a lot of people dislike about this film is that it is something that isn't typically scary. And the way they have some sound design with it, I assume you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
But many people would probably potentially laugh at that. When I first heard it, I was like, whoa, what the heck is going on?
Right.
And I think that was the point. It doesn't sound right. It doesn't sound like this is what it should sound like.
There's a settling in period, right? At first it feels a little goofy. I'm not going to lie, because, I was just like, whoa, this movie's too smart to have this going on. But then once you kind of settle into that, you're like, oh no, this is pretty terrifying. You're welcome, audience. Like, we're doing our best to be as vague as possible so you could really experience this film.
As soon as, like, you need to watch it. But as soon as you do, I'm pretty sure you'll understand what we're talking about.
Right. When someone has, like, a guess on what's going on, I'm just like, oh, that's kind of weird. But then the more it progresses and the more it kind of, like, unravels and everyone kind of unravels, I'm like, man, this is just done so right, like, because it respects its audience so much, where it doesn't beat you over the head with voiceover or exposition scenes and all this. It just kind of like you said, you're there with them. So you're kind of figuring everything out or not figuring everything out with the group. And that's just like, again, for a first feature, this guy like just nails it.
And it's funny that you mentioned that there's not like a bunch of fluff exposition, because they do talk about like all of the potentials of what is actually happening.
Right.
Every not every character, but at least one character talks about, you know, this could be this could be aliens, it could be a bunch of things. Each of those potentials are brought up, and they're besides like the alien part, which people laugh at, but you know, they're all like taken relatively seriously of like, yes, this is an actual possibility that could be happening. The ambiguity throughout the entire thing of like, oh, this piece of evidence adds on to this part, but wait, now this new thing doesn't really make sense with the other thing. So I really appreciate the fact that it, and typically I don't like stories that are inconclusive. Mm-hmm. For whatever reason, this one works because the point is we're not supposed to know what the hell is happening.
Exactly. Oh God. And they just did it so well. It's just, I can't get over that, you know, this is a film made by people that, you know, some of the actors have been in other things. Mark Anthony Williams has been on like Arrow and The Flash. And so some of these, you know, actors have been in other films or TV shows. Like, they're all working, and a lot of them are just like filmmakers themselves. I think Andrew Moxham is also a filmmaker. Same with Shane Tourden. But you could tell that this is just like made by filmmakers for a very specific audience that is just like, we like caution to the wind. We don't care about those popcorn horror fans. Like you said, we're gonna put out something that's smart and that's intricate, but not above anyone. Like, it's very approachable.
Yeah, they don't like talk down to the audience.
Right.
Like like there are characters that talk down to each other, but it's not smart with an air of like, oh, this film isn't for you if you don't understand why it's great.
Right.
As long as you are a patient type of person who enjoys the suspenseful build-up in a horror film, this film is for you. Like, it's not like, oh, you have to have a PhD in anthropology in order to understand the nuances between the Canadian Aboriginal studier and the other doctor in the film.
And you could tell that this was a passion project that's still... the people that made it are very passionate about it. Like, I put out just like a random tweet about it yesterday, and almost the entire cast, the DP and the director, are just like so happy that we're talking about their film. And this is a film that was made like 6 years ago. You know, This is a 2014 film, and they're still just like, anytime you want to talk about this film, I'm for it. Like, they're so happy about it, and that's so cool. Like, that is that's what this show is for. But just to like show people that these type of like passion projects exist, and to find these diamonds in the rough. And once again, Justin, I just have to say thank you for even suggesting this film to me. I would have never known it without you, so I owe you a great deal.
Well, I really I love the essentially excuse to talk more about this film, because as I said, I'm not the biggest fan of watching movies, because for what it's worth, you might notice I talk relatively fast. I consume YouTube content at 2 times speed. I try to consume as much stuff at 2 times speed as possible, because that's just how fast I go.
Sure.
But for whatever reason, Black Mountainside was not only fine at normal speed for me, but it was made better by the way it was slowly paced. And so for someone like me, who's impatient as all hell, to like a movie like this, it made me realize just how impeccable the film was. And I tried to find people to talk with about it, and like everyone I talked to was like, yeah, I have no idea what movie you're talking about.
Oh man,
so
yeah.
The ability for me in any capacity just to get more people to understand the beauty of this film is great.
What do you think this film's legacy is, and what it should be?
So I think, unfortunately, what its legacy is a lower budget version of the thing. I think that's what essentially many people, not all, obviously, but many people who've seen this, that's kind of like, this is a slower, lower budget thing. Yeah. The legacy of this film should be, this is a perfect template for, or not template, but a perfect example of existential dread in a film that is able to essentially get away with not having a higher budget. I actually think that this film would have potentially done worse with a higher budget, right? Because of the limitations that they had budget-wise, they weren't able to show the entity as much as they otherwise could have, right? They had actors who were very obviously passionate about the project, so they were bringing their best. If you buy essentially an actor for the highest bid, they might not be as invested in the project and they might not be putting as much of their soul into it. But this film, like, you get that everything in this movie is exactly how they want it to be.
Yes.
And I think that needs to be the legacy.
And real quick, the performances, spot on. I couldn't, I found myself kept picking a new favorite person throughout the film, where I'm just like, oh, this guy is like really funny, or this guy's really cool, he's got this going on, or this guy's kind of creepy, oh, what's going on here? And I found myself rooting for literally everyone. And it, like you said at the top of this, where you're just like, in a standard horror film, they make their characters so unlikable for a reason, because we just want to see them die. Like a great example of a film I just covered on the show, Carriers, where they made their main cast so goddamn unlikable, where I just wanted to see them get syphilis of the face and keel over and die. And then, like, put that juxtaposition with this, and I cared about what happened to every single one of these people. And that's a very special thing in your 2014 horror film. So these people just nailed it, and it just really shows how much TLC went into this. I want to thank you again. I want to thank everyone that made this film. Justin Thibault, why don't you look in that camera, tell everyone where to find you and what you got going on.
So you can find me. I think my Twitter name is just Justin Thibault. It might be something else. I'm gonna look real quick.
It is.
I don't know who I am. Okay, cool. No, I'm at Theoric6, which is hard to spell. So hopefully you put that in the description. But
it's
you can also
floating under
me...
you this whole time. You didn't know?
Oh, cool.
Yeah,
cool. It's at Theoric6. I tweet about mostly my Magic the Gathering content, so you can find me on YouTube or technically Twitch. I'm mostly on YouTube though, and I mostly make Magic the Gathering content. But I also play this game called Stone Shard, and it's super. It's also one of these hidden gems. Although for what it's worth, it's only a hidden gem because it's an early access. But it's hardcore. Like, if you like hardcore RPGs, check it out. But also check me out. Yeah. I'm cool.
He is a cool guy. Come back anytime, Justin Thibault. If you want to follow us on Twitter, you could do so at The Cult of Films, all lowercase. If you want to follow me on my own Twitter page, I'm at John the Host. So until next time, I don't know, do we have a cool out for this episode? I always make this a very awkward ending for all the guests.
Well, at the end of all of my YouTube videos, I say all will be one. And I say that because I like the Phyrexians, who are this like weird Borgy style, also kind of Lovecraftian.
Very Lovecraftian.
Yeah.
All right.
All will be one.